Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to today's session on registered apprenticeships for the K-12 principal. As you can see, very cozy environment we have here today. I'm with my good friend, Lori Matsky, the Assistant State Superintendent for the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. It's kind of like what do you say, a fireside chat that we're going to have today, which is great. We're coming live I'm actually back in old stomping grounds, Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, for the National Rural Education Conference that will actually be presenting at after this webinar. So it's going to be a marathon day. But thank you again for everyone for coming. Really excited to kick off or celebrate, I should say, National Apprenticeship Week. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. So as I shared, good friend Lori is from the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, and myself represent the National Center for Grow Your Own. And so a little bit about our organization first, and I'm gonna kick things off, and then you're gonna hear about the incredible work that North Dakota has done, and then we'll open it up to questions. And so speaking of questions, please feel free to submit questions at any time in the chat, and then we're gonna have plenty of time to get to those for the second half of today's session. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Myself, as I mentioned, I'm in my old stomping grounds of Tennessee. I used to be the Chief of Human Capital at the Tennessee Department of Education, and joined by some excellent colleagues, Miles and Ben, and some new hires starting soon we're really excited about. But we work with states, districts, and ed prep providers to launch or expand grow your own programs and or registered apprenticeships. And we started by building off of our work in Tennessee with the statewide Grow Your Own and the first ever teacher apprenticeship program. And now as a nonprofit, we were able to work with North Dakota, and why you all are here today to hear about the first ever registered apprenticeship for principals. And so kind of setting some of the framework from a talent perspective, the why behind some of this work. In my background, I was a former teacher, but I also was a principal and led talent at a district level as well with Detroit Public Schools. When it comes to why we should do this work of building pathways for the principalship, we want to be thinking about how can we reduce those financial barriers for folks who want to become a principal. In my past roles at the state level, I'd have district superintendents saying to me all the time, look, David, when I have a principal opening, I have the same 15 people knocking down my door, all with their certificate in hand, wanting this job. Don't you think I would have hired any of them already if I thought they were ready for this role, if I felt that I wanted them in this seat? Who I want is the third grade teacher who's been here for 12 years, who has the respect of her peers, but because we don't pay teachers enough, she's still paying off her student loans from getting her bachelor's degree in teaching, that she's not willing to take out more loans to get her master's in school leadership. So we got to remove those financial barriers. Number two, how can we address vacancies in leader positions and support a positive culture for teacher retention? As reference, the work that our organization does around teacher grow your own and registered apprenticeship programs, where we are removing those financial barriers, that work, which is happening, you're going to hear in North Dakota and across the country. It's great work, and it's really exciting time to see this work spread. But we got to remember, the best recruitment strategy is having a better retention strategy. And one of the best ways we can retain all these teachers that we're moving into the profession by removing those financial barriers is making sure they have a high quality school leader. Why does anybody leave any job? Most of the time, it's because of who you work for. So if we can better prepare and have the right types of principals who are responsible for setting the culture and the belonging and the environment of a school, then I think we're going to do a better job of retaining our teachers. Number three, how can we extend the clinical internship experience or that residency requirement with the ultimate goal? And feel free to laugh, but how can we eliminate the concept of a first-year principal? In my personal experience, when I was a principal in Michigan, in Detroit, the policy in Michigan was you just have to enroll in a program within 6 months and complete it within 3 years. So I had no training, no background. I had no master's in school leadership. And in Tennessee, and it's going to sound like I'm saying this flippantly, but it's true. You could literally become a principal by reading a book, meaning there was no clinical internship or residency type requirement. And so that is one reason the benefits of registered apprenticeship is getting that hands-on experience under a mentor principal who is the principal of record as you're going through your training program. Number four, we always got to be focusing on how can we better diversify the principal profession. And that could look like getting more leaders of color into the role. It can look like getting more women into the principalship. If over 80% of teachers are women, and yet we have less than, I think, 50% of principals are women, we can do better. How do we address that? How can we get more folks from military backgrounds, more folks with disabilities into principal and school leadership positions? And then finally, in my past role, I also oversaw all ed prep. I don't work in government anymore, first time in over 15 years, so I can kind of speak maybe a little more freely than what Lori is able to do. But one of the things I would say is we had 42 different educator preparation providers in the state of Tennessee. Not all were created equal. So if we're going to be investing taxpayer dollars, and you're going to hear some very creative financial investments by North Dakota in this space, then we want to make sure that we are sending them to high quality providers. I want to give kudos to groups like the Wallace Foundation and LPI, who have done really good work in building principal pipelines and the research around that work, as well as shout out to organizations which we'll be highlighting later, but National Association of Elementary School Principals and Secondary Principals as well, for ensuring that high quality preparation is very important to this work. And so we had the honor and privilege of working with Lori and Superintendent Basler in helping North Dakota work through the U.S. Department of Labor to get the occupation of a principal approved just this past summer in July. You're going to hear from Lori about the actual program itself, which is really exciting. The first in the nation, I might add. And by having the U.S. Department of Labor approve this, what it means now is any state can take advantage of this opportunity. So if you think about, same with teacher, which got approved 2 years ago this month, so it's a little bit of a happy birthday anniversary we're going through. What's really exciting here is the same money that historically has been used to train people to become plumbers or welders or work in the culinary arts or IT or cybersecurity now can be tapped to train people to become teachers, and for the sake of this conversation, school leaders. And we want to give a shout out to partners, and I know Lori will talk more about it later too, at CCSSO, which I believe just wrapped up a huge conference this week in Tennessee over in Nashville. And again, thank you to National Association of Secondary School Principals and Elementary School Principals, as well as some great North Dakota partners that Lori will highlight. And before I turn it over to her, in a perfect segue, just want to give a quote from our partner and Lori's amazing leader that she gets to work for, State Superintendent Basler, in that strong leadership is the bedrock of any successful school. And this apprenticeship program offers our future North Dakota school administrators the financial help and training they need to fulfill their potential. So this promise that Superintendent Basler has made into this work, it's incredibly exciting. And now you get to hear from the person that's leading this work, the first in the nation, Lori Matzke. So Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, David. And welcome everyone. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Miles. So happy to be here today to talk about North Dakota's work in this area. It is an honor to be the first state in the nation to have a registered principal apprenticeship program. And truly our hope is that we will be able to talk about it as much as we're able to share information with all of you to replicate it. And so we're really hoping that other states and districts across the nation see this, hear about this work and find it intriguing, and why reinvent the wheel? So use the work that we've done to create their own unique registered principal apprenticeship program. So the why. And so I think it was last spring, the National Secondary Principals Association came out with a survey. They surveyed their members, and it was a little alarming in that it showed that there was some stress, in the position, and that there is the potential there for a possible principal shortage going forward in the future, similar to what we're all facing now with the teacher shortage. And so North Dakota was reading that research. And so as David was talking with Superintendent Basler and I about the possibility of a principal apprenticeship program, we thought, you know what, let's get ahead of the game. Right now, we really don't have a principal shortage in North Dakota, but if there are some concerns that this could possibly be an issue in the future, let's be proactive. Let's get this put in place so that we have a strong principal pipeline in place. So there's always that issue. But truly, the biggest reason why we were interested in pursuing this work was to strengthen that principal preparation program, as David talked about. We've all talked to individuals who will tell stories about how they did not feel adequately prepared that first year of being a principal. And so we really just took this as an opportunity to provide aspiring principals in North Dakota with the opportunity to go through that year-long program, be under the leadership of a high-quality principal, be able to job shadow. And so that was our main reason for wanting to go forward with this. There's just so many benefits to the apprentices with that hands-on experience and the earn and learn as you go. And so, we're addressing the potential principal shortage in the future is like a bonus, but really wanting to strengthen that principal pipeline preparation. So it is amazing to look back and see how fast all of this transpired. And so we, of course, started our partnership with the National Center for Grow Your Own in the last fall, in the fall of 2022. And then we got our registered teacher apprenticeship program application written and submitted and approved by the U.S. Department of Labor. But it was shortly after that, it was in the new year, last January 2023, when David approached Superintendent Basler and I about the possibility of submitting an application to the U.S. Department of Labor for a registered principal apprenticeship program. And so looking at starting all of this in January, we quickly developed an application, submitted it to the U.S. Department of Labor in February. Then we wanted to be prepared so that the minute we found out, hopefully, that we received approval, that we would be ready to go with implementation. So in those months while we were waiting to hear from the U.S. Department of Labor, we used some of our Title II dollars and we put out an aspiring principals pipeline grant opportunity to interested EPPs in the spring. And then collected those applications, got them reviewed and scored, and it literally just flowed and worked out perfectly. Where in July 10th of this past summer, we heard from the U.S. Department of Labor that registered principal apprenticeship program had been approved. We were able to approve the first EPP to have this program, and we actually started implementation this past fall. And so looking at starting in January, February, and then being able to implement in the fall, it's been a whirlwind, but the timeline went very smoothly, actually, and very quickly. So the North Dakota model focuses on two main concepts. First, we're really looking for an assistant principal or dean of students or someone in that type of position who is interested in becoming a principal in the future. And so they can continue in their role and be under the mentorship of a high quality principal, go back at nights and weekends, get their master's in school leadership, and then, be a building principal. So that's kind of the audience that we were targeting, would be those assistant principals or deans of students. And then the other key concept of both our teacher principal program and our registered principal program is really looking at that grow your own approach. And that's mainly because of how rural we are. So we have a very difficult time encouraging teachers and new principals to go out to our rural districts because, you know, it can be isolating. There's not as many social opportunities. There's, you know, not a gym to go to work out. And so that's just always been an issue. And so by using a grow your own approach, those individuals are already working in that community. You know, they're invested there. They like that community. Maybe they're married. They have a farm on the generation or, you know, something that ties them there. They grew up there in that district. And so if we can find those individuals who we can take and, you know, have them go back to school to become a teacher, or in this case, a principal, then they're much more likely to stay there and be, you know, invested in that school district. So our model kind of focuses on those two main concepts. So our very first program. So the EPP that was approved is North Dakota State University, which is in Fargo, North Dakota. And Fargo or NDSU is working with 3 school districts on this first registered principal apprenticeship program. And it worked out perfectly where we have a large district, Fargo Public Schools, a mid-sized district, which is Wahpeton Public Schools, and then a very small district, Central Cass. And so Fargo does have the bulk of the slots. They have 8 of them. And then Wahpeton has 1 spot and Central Cass has 1. So we have 10 apprentices within this first program and working there with those 3 districts in this first program. And of those 10, 9 of them are women and we have 1 male. And most of them, as I said, there are a couple assistant principals. And we also have some like MTSS coordinators, student performance strategists, those individuals who are leaders in education, but they, you know, have the flexibility in their schedule to be able to take on more and more some of those, you know, principal duties and work under the mentorship of a high quality principal. So that's what our very first program looks like. Next slide, Matt. In North Dakota, very small state, very small education department. I believe we're the smallest in the nation. So we knew from the onset that this would have to be a very collaborative initiative. We know in North Dakota, very red state, that it's reduce government, not grow government. So if we apply for grants, we just do so knowing that we can't ask for an FTE. So we have to be able to find partners that can help us with this work. And so I'm leading this work in the Department of Public Instruction, but leaning heavily on all of my partners, which includes, you know, our Office of Apprenticeship Director, Barry Dutton, our Education Standards and Practices Board, Dr. Pitkin. We have hired a contracted liaison who is helping us with all of this grow your own work, both the teacher part and the principal. And then Dr. Holly Mackey is the individual at NDSU who is coordinating this work. And then, of course, our partnership with David, Ben, and Miles. We so appreciate them. They have been instrumental in helping us actually get these programs registered and everyone logged into the portal. And so we really rely heavily on our partners and value their input. In addition to the partners who help us with the day-to-day work, we of course also have the partners that helped us with the concept, refine our concept and help us create our application. And so as David mentioned before, the council, the National Center for Grow Your Own and the Council for Chief State School Officers, they were actually co-sponsors of our application to the U.S. Department of Labor. So we appreciate that partnership. And then in addition to that, we had several conversations and received some input from the National Association of Elementary School Principals, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, And then specifically in North Dakota, our NDCEL, our North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders, which is all our administrator group, and then ND United, North Dakota United, which is our union. And so we're very proud of the fact that we had very strong support from all of these entities, and we really feel like that helped us make our application a much stronger one to submit to the U.S. Department of Labor. Just to kind of go over some challenges, recommendations, if for those of you who may be considering this option, obviously funding is an issue for many states. And so, as I said, in North Dakota, for right now, we are using our Title II funds. And it's not the regular Title II funds, but if any of you are familiar with the Title II program, you know, most of the dollars go out to the districts. The states are allowed to keep a small portion for admin. And then there's also a regulation where states can set off an additional 3% off the top for leadership activities. So it's the 3% set aside for leadership activities that we are using to fund this registered principal apprenticeship work. And so the very first grant we put out was for $150,000 to fund 10 apprentices. And as I mentioned, NDSU received that award. So we're contemplating, you know, whether we should hopefully try and apply for a grant through the U.S. Department of Labor next spring, fingers crossed, if they provide some grant opportunities again. But for right now, we're using those Title II dollars. So that may be a source of funding that may work for you as well. Obviously, the increased workload is a challenge. As I mentioned, you know, we didn't have any additional FTEs. But our partners at the National Center for Grow Your Own have been instrumental. Like I said, they're the ones that have worked with Barry Dutton in the Office of Apprenticeship to get all that official paperwork submitted. And, you know, that's their expertise. And so that was just very helpful to have somebody who knew the ins and outs of all that. And then we have hired a contracted liaison, Dr. Lynn Hammonds, who is helping with all of this work as well. And then as far as the requirements, you know, because this is new, there was a lot of apprehension on the part of the districts as far as, well, if I do this, what am I getting myself into? What does this all entail? So something that we found beneficial was to create an MOU. And we do have a sample of our MOU available on our website if you would like to look at that. And it goes through and it spells out, here are all of the responsibilities of the sponsor, which is the Department of Public Instruction. Here are all of the responsibilities of the provider, the NDSU. Here are the responsibilities for all LEAs that choose to engage in this work. And so that seemed to lower anxiety a lot, just to have something in writing, concrete, that's spelled out, you know, what they're committing to if they take this on. And so that would be a recommendation that I would have for you, is to, you know, create some kind of MOU in advance that you could share with interested LEAs that would like to potentially do this work. The biggest surprise, and it's so interesting how it went completely full circle. So in the beginning, we were thinking that this was going to be an opportunity mainly for large districts. And, you know, we were feeling kind of bad for the small LEAs, but we figured, you know, the large LEAs obviously have many, many more buildings, many more principals, assistant principals, where in our small districts in North Dakota, which is most of our districts, you know, 98% of them, there's one principal. Sometimes they're too small to even have an assistant principal. So we really thought the large districts were at an advantage here. However, what we quickly learned as we got into this work was that even though it is not a state requirement, many of the assistant principals in our large districts, they already have a master's in ed leadership. They already have the principal credential. And so, you know, that took many of them out of the loop, where when we started looking at the small LEAs or even the mid-sized ones, they did have an assistant principal who oftentimes did not have that master's yet or their principal credential. So then that was kind of, you know, seeming that maybe the small LEAs, this would be better for them. However, kind of in the end, and as I mentioned before, Fargo, our large district, has the bulk of the spots, not 8 of the 10. And so what we found is that by broadening our pool from assistant principals to, like I said, MTS coordinators, student performance strategists, there's one of them who's a media director, but other more leadership positions in the district, then that once again, we found that it was kind of an advantage there for our large districts because of course they had the luxury of having all of those positions on staff, which many of the small LEAs don't. So we're going to keep working on this to try and make it fair and equitable and balanced. And so we can hopefully have a good mixture of large, small, and medium districts who benefit from all of this work. But right now, we're seeing that it's been advantageous really for the larger districts. Just wanted to share that again, so people don't feel like they have to reinvent the wheel. We have a grow your own website with lots of information there. We have 5 key grow your own programs in play. And so there's information on all of those programs that you can click on the box there and get information, not only on the registered principal apprenticeship program, but the other 4 as well. And then some resources that might specifically be helpful to the principal apprenticeship program. Again, we have that sample MOU that outlines all of the responsibilities from all of the partners involved. We have the National Center for Grow Your Own's nice 1-pager that is a great synopsis of the registered principal program. And then probably most beneficial to all of you, we actually have our application that we submitted to the U.S. Department of Labor posted there on our website. So you can see, what did we submit to them? What all needs to be part of an application to the U.S. Department of Labor. And then our bulletin from the U.S. Department of Labor announcing our approval. And so just some resources that may be helpful if all of you are continuing this work. And so that's just a little bit about North Dakota's Registered Principal Apprenticeship Program. And David and I would be happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Great, folks. So please feel free to submit any questions that you may have in the chat. One thing while folks may be submitting those questions, want to add, when Lori talked about the Title II funds that they use right now, one of the reasons along with that is North Dakota was not eligible, nor was any state eligible to take advantage of the SAFE grants for principal this year because the occupation wasn't yet approved. And so now going into 2024, I'm really intrigued to see any states try to take advantage along with teacher applying for the SAFE grant, could do teacher and leader now. So that will be really interesting. And I just want to thank Lori and North Dakota for their incredible leadership in this work. And she means it when she says, want to see this work replicate across the country. I know just last week, we had the first district in the first program through a district in the state of Texas approved for registered apprenticeship. So shout out to Ector County ISD and Bill, actually, Jamie Miller from there, and kudos to superintendent there, Scott Murray. Jamie will be on a webinar we're doing tomorrow about districts involved in teacher apprenticeships and other things like that. So, all right, let's see here. So question, Lori, I'm going to read this out loud if you want to take a stab at it first. Is somebody's, exploring potentially pursuing this themselves, how long do you think you would recommend that it might take for them to complete this opportunity?
Well, as I said, when I went over the timeline, we were amazed that you would think that it would be a very long, drawn out process. It really wasn't. And so I guess my recommendation or my thoughts on that is that I think it will go quicker than you probably would imagine. And so, especially if you have the help of someone like Grow Your Own or someone else helping you develop the application. If you look on ours, you can see what components need to be in there. But now that they have, the U.S. Department of Labor has approved one, it should be a much quicker process for them to approve others. So it's really not an overly time-consuming process to get the application developed, and then it shouldn't take too long to get it approved. And so I think it could, be done in a series of, 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, something else I would add, because Lori referenced it on her timeline, but she's never going to brag about herself. So if you remember in her timeline, she talked about before the occupation was approved, even she concurrently ran a competitive grant to find ed prep partners that would be interested in partnering with districts for this work. And so that's when it comes to timeline, it's 2 different answers. If you already have a district and an ed prep program that have a great high quality partnership ready to go, then it can be done in less than 2 months. And that was the case in Ector County. They already had leader prep pipelines, and they also have an internal pipeline that they use. What the hard work that Lori and North Dakota did is they did all the work for the entire nation to get the occupation approved. So that was the first thing. So now nobody has to go through that. But what she then had was that competitive grant that she was very strategically running while waiting for the occupation to be approved, so that once the occupation was approved, you were able to say, here's the ed prep provider, here's the districts in our pilot, and then we got to support you with good old Barry Dutton. And I don't know if Barry's on here, but we're big fans of him in the U.S. Department of Labor. And so that's the answer. If you're starting from scratch, it could be 6 months. If you already got a high quality partnership, could be as little as 2 months. So point being, as we're in November, sometimes I have to remember what month it is. Anybody could have a program up and running for next school year. So I think that's what is really exciting about, and part of the reason a good timing for a webinar like this is you can, as you're working on budgeting for next fiscal year and things like that, you can have this. But yeah, okay. Sorry, folks, I'm reading the questions, processing before I read them out loud. This is a great question. So this individual has a master's in curriculum instruction, but they don't have the field experience course necessary for the principal credential. And so they're wondering, would this apply to them? So I'm going to take a stab at this first, just because. So what I left out about my personal story, because I was like, well, I didn't have a master's in school leadership, so I wasn't prepared. Well, I had a master's in teaching and I had a master's in ed policy, but I didn't have a master's in school leadership. And of course, this will always be a state by state thing. Licensure looks different in different places, but this is the type of program that would have been perfect for somebody like me, and thus perfect for somebody like you that submitted this question. Lori, do you want to remind folks again about in your pilot how the different backgrounds of folks that are in this program?
Yeah, I would say that this type of program is perfect for that situation. And we do have some situations like that where they have a master's in something, just not a master's in school leadership. And so, when you look at the media director or the instructional strategists, and so it's very likely that some of them have a master's in curriculum and instruction. And so I think that this type of program is perfect because, they can easily get that master's in school leadership within that year. And then they have that clinical where they're working under the supervision of a high quality principal, slowly taking on additional duties, getting that role modeling. So I think that's a perfect segue.
I do see that our good friend Barry Dutton is in fact on this call, and he just sent us a message. If there is anybody attending this session from a labor background, please reach out to Barry. If you want to have like a labor to labor conversation. Barry was incredible to work with.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so want to recognize that, and also a perfect segue. We're actually in, look, folks, I'll never do this again, but we have 4 webinars this week. And so I mentioned we have 1 tomorrow. Well, we actually have 2 tomorrow. The second one is on state apprenticeship agencies. So we had the privilege of working with Barry, who works directly for the U.S. Department of Labor, whereas in some other states, they have the authority to approve programs at the state level. And so we have a webinar tomorrow on state apprenticeship agencies' roles in the K-12 teacher apprenticeship. And so, but I just want to shout out to Barry, shout out to the U.S. Department of Labor, as well as to state apprenticeship agency directors across the country. We've been very blessed to work with folks who are all about removing financial barriers for aspiring educators, whether teacher or principal. All right, next question. Is there more of a clinical element to the pilot principal apprenticeship than there is in traditional masters in school leadership programs? If so, what does that look like? Lori, do you want to start with on that one, and then I can speak again to my experience?
Sure. I think it varies, obviously, from state to state, from EPP to EPP. So yeah. I think that's going to be one that's going to be highly variable. But all I can say is our program that we've created, we've been very intentional about making sure that it has that's a very strong component where, like I said before, they gradually take on additional responsibilities, lots of job shadowing, and just, that strong mentoring piece to it.
Yeah, and I'll say from my experience, I mentioned earlier that I was a principal without a master's, which meant I had no internship or no master's in school leadership. And then when I oversaw in Tennessee, there was no requirement for clinical internship to be a principal or graduate with a master's in school leadership. So one we did not do, I want to be very clear, because as North Dakota, that was first. We did have a grow your own program in Tennessee for school leaders, in which there was a programmatic requirement to require a minimum 1 year clinical internship experience. So in any registered apprenticeship, you will have to have the hours, the equivalent usually of minimum 1 school year, 1 academic year. And so you're looking at being under a mentor, or in labor speak, a journey worker, but a mentor principal, while you're completing these on-the-job competencies, so that it's not just getting your master's in school leadership, it's also getting the best of both worlds by having that mentor say, yes, you have mastered this competency in instructional leadership and this for, culture. And you'll be able to see in North Dakota's application and what we had the honor and privilege of supporting them on, an example of on-the-job competencies. I think the thing that I always like highlighting is that, and Laura, you already hit on it, this work can be customized to your state or your district's priorities or your values. So there may be certain things you want to see all principals trained in the science of reading. You could embed that into the on-the-job competencies. That's what's really unique and I think exciting about this work. All right. If there is anyone else that has any other questions, we do not at this time see any others in the chat, but we can hold on for a second. Otherwise, we just want to thank everybody for coming, and we'll hold for a second, but we're really excited to see where this work goes. I think I just want to hit again how, we do have another question. I'll just say really quick though, it's all about locus of control. You can start now with your Title II funds. While, Laura already said she's going to seek out labor funds next year for this, but you can start with your Title II. A lot of places, I always say it's the Kevin Costner approach, not Yellowstone, the Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And so with this pilot, now Lori has a proof point to say, hey, this works. This is what we've been able to do. And maybe it will lead to a state legislature putting money towards this. We've seen that for the teacher work in including North Dakota, which we'll actually be presenting on in person in about 30 minutes. All right, next question. How does the LEA support principals who are providing the mentorship? Ooh, I like that question. Lord, do you want to try to take a stab at that? I mean, you're coming at it from a state level, but I'm curious.
So we have, the slide where I was going through all of our partners, we work very closely with Dr. Holly Mackey at NDSU, and she is the one that is kind of that middleman, the coordinator between the EPP and the LEA. And so, she has been working with them on that MOU, and all of the elements that need to be addressed, such as the mentoring. And so we don't have like a mandatory requirement that has to be uniform for everyone, but it's more going to be unique to what each district can provide. Like I said, one of our districts is very large, one is very small, so that piece is going to look very different in each of those districts. So it's kind of unique and personalized, and it's the coordinator's job to kind of work with the EPP and the LEA to formulate on how that's going to look.
Yeah, and I'm speaking broad in my reply to that. Like if you're, Laura, you talked earlier about large districts versus small districts. Like in the case of larger districts, they're going to have the principal supervisor or the associate superintendent of high schools or elementary schools being able to provide support to the principal who is serving as that mentor to make sure there is alignment. But I think the broader thing, and again, I want to, shout out to groups like the Wallace Foundation and with the investments they've made in principal pipelines, and Learning Policy Institute, LPI, and New Leaders is another great example of a great organization doing work in the principal space for decades. I say all that to say that if anything, I think this conversation about registered apprenticeships for principals, it's all about intentionality. You are seeing districts be more, you even said it yourself, like this right now, and I'm trying to knock on wood. North Dakota is not facing a principal shortage, but they're being strategic. They're being proactive. They're being intentional in building a high quality pipeline. And when you start to build that high quality pipeline, questions like this come up and say, okay, we are removing financial barriers for folks who want to be aspiring principal. Great. Okay. We have a really high quality framework with these on the job competencies that are aligned to, best practices and a great framework. Okay, now what? Wait a second. Our journey workers, labor speak, our mentor principals, what do they need to be successful in this work? Because you could run into an issue. Now, if I'm just being direct, you might have a principal say, well, wait, am I like coaching my successor? And they might be like hesitant. Whereas, most folks want to contribute to the overall health of the leadership pipeline, but there's different things that can play into that I think it's a really, like, it all goes back to intentionality. Okay, now that we've addressed this issue, what type of support, what wraparound do we need for our mentors? Really quick on the teacher side, I would just add that we saw a lot, and this was a mistake I made. So again, I really always have appreciated Lori. We both want folks to learn lessons learned, that we've had. One of the things in Tennessee is there was, and this work preceded me, so I can't take credit for any of this, is that there was intentionality to align aspiring teachers with mentor teachers for their student teaching experience, clinical internship, based on their student growth scores. And it found out, the research showed that folks that were aligned to teachers that had moved the needle on student growth had a better overall experience. However, yes, and how do we continuous improvement? Just because you can move student growth scores doesn't necessarily mean you're a good coach of adults. If anybody talked to me in the way that they talk to elementary students, that probably wouldn't be a great mentor-mentee relationship. I wouldn't have the personality for that. And so we learned we need to invest in adult development, adult coaching, the psychology of coaching adults.
One other thought is, it, like right now we're on a bare bones funding scheme where, we're using the Title II funds to get this going. So there really aren't any extra funds to do extra things. But one of the things, if we decide to apply for a grant through the U.S. Department of Labor, what we're doing in our teacher program, because we have that big $4.1 million grant, is, the LEAs are required to have a mentor for the teachers, the universities are required to have a mentor for the teachers. And then at the state level, we're doing what's called the Genius Hour, where we are once a week. Like 1 week we meet with elementary apprentices, the second week we meet with high school, then special ed, and then we bring them all together. And I think that could be a very helpful component for the principals as well, where we bring all of the principal apprentices together to talk about, what's going well, what concerns do you have? But again, there's really no funding for that. But if in a perfect world, if I could, write a grant and get additional funding, I think that would be a great to have, like we have for teachers.
Yeah. We have another question that says, And Lori, this is geared towards you. So if you want to take the first stab at this one, you mentioned that the university received a grant to support this program. If a grant is not available, how would the educational program be funded? Would aspiring principals be responsible for funding the degree themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's certainly an option, although, what we have found, I think it wasn't too difficult to find these 10 individuals. And I think that is because, the funding that is there to pay for the going back to school, as David mentioned several times, many of these people probably may still have school loans from getting their teaching degree. And so, what we have found with both our teacher and our principal apprenticeship program, as that has really been the enticing part of this, is having the grant funding to pay for them to go back to school to get their degree. And so, sure, could it be done without that? It could, but I mean, I think it would lose a lot in, getting people that are interested in being part of this program.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way things are right now, right? Like, and that's why we don't have that's why we have the same 15 people with the certificate in hand who are superintendents. Like, I never will hire you. I don't want you. I would have hired you by now. And so it goes back to that, being able to leverage for the first time ever, literally, and I think it's Barry might correct me here, 86 years or 87 years since the National Apprenticeship Act was created, accessing labor funds, accessing apprenticeship funds, to be able to help pay for this program. We work with districts, we work with states, we work with universities. We actually just launched in partnership with Deans for Impact, a new, we have a state network that North Dakota is a part of. 30 states are members of that. We have a district network with over 30 districts. And now we just launched an ed prep network with Deans for Impact around registered apprenticeships, because yes, there is funding out there. I want to be clear about that. And I mean, Lori just kind of dropped it without like, as if it was no big deal. 4.1 million that she was able to get for the SAFE grant. So yeah, 4.1 million goes a long way no matter what state you are in. And so that's really exciting. And we just put in the chat a link to the state network. We actually literally just added Arizona this week. So we're officially at 30 members, technically 29 states plus District of Columbia. So 30 members for that. All right. Well, Lori, I don't see any other questions at this time. So our emails are up there. I know Ben and Miles have put links in the chat to North Dakota's resources, which are incredible and very kind and benevolent to share, as well as links to our site as well. If either of us could ever be helpful, I always believe states listen to states, districts like talking to districts. And if we can be helpful ourselves, please let us know. But thank you so much for coming to today's webinar. Again, we got 2 more tomorrow. And we really look forward to seeing more school leaders that are picked that are graduating debt-free, and inspiring teachers and retaining their teachers, so that we can reach a day and age when all kids have not only the teacher they need, but deserve. And we think school leadership is a key part of that. So
yeah, we are happy to answer questions. So please, you always think of questions afterwards.
Yeah.
reach out. We're there to help.
Or just teleport to Chattanooga, and if you can get here in 30 minutes, we'll be presenting again. So this time in person. All right, enough with the jokes. All right, thanks for coming to our fireside chat, and we'll talk to you all later.